What's up, and welcome to another exciting episode of Back for Our Future, the show that looks back to help us and you understand the future of what may come. Who knows what it will be? I'm your host, Drew Hall, and with me, as always, is the king of the co-hosts, the man who once scored 105 points against UTEP.
True.
in college football. Recently. At 40-something years old.
I scored more than double my age.
That's perfect. That's what you got to do. Anyway, join with me as always is Tony Nick Najati. Welcome back to the show, Tony. Good to have you back in town from your whirlwind trip. We don't have to go into where you went, but it was an excitingly good story.
No. But yeah, I'm glad to be back.
So today on the show, lots of fun stuff coming up. Lots of big stories that we have. I'm excited to talk through some of these. As always, just before we jump in, thank you guys and gals for all the comments. It's been amazing, the feedback we have. I noticed now that Spotify now has comments. I apologize that we did not see those comments. We have now seen those, and I have clicked to post those comments. So thank you for those that have given us some comments on Spotify. You can also watch the show on Spotify, YouTube, listen to it on your favorite podcast network. If you're just tuning in for the very first time, thanks for hanging out with us. We're going to start off with a banger called Cliffhanger. So the first movie we're going to talk about here is Cliffhanger, and there's a lot to unpack in here. And one of the things you might want to unpack is a large sandwich, because that's what happened when I saw this movie. Tony, you want to carry this one away?
Yeah, I mean, this was a fun one. I mean, we saw this at Carmike's Inn,
yep.
And we grabbed my big Uncle Skip, and who was happened to be in town from St. Louis at the time. And we went to kind of a later showing of this movie. I mean, it was like about 9:30, somewhere in that range. And you got to stay out a little bit later and come with us because we were with some adults. And yeah, I mean, when we go to movies, we bring our own stuff. I mean, we do. We're notorious for it. And sandwiches are something that we do bring. I've got an affinity for chocolate covered peanuts and almonds.
That's true.
And raisins and all that stuff. So a lot of that stuff comes with us a lot of times. In this case, yeah, we did have a sandwich. I think we had some sub or something like that with us.
It was Subway.
Yeah.
Because I remember it clearly, because I was sitting kind of on the end. This is the first time I'd gone to the movie with your whole family,
right.
If by memory serves. And I remember sitting there and we're watching the movie. And Tony does two things with the chocolate peanuts. You need to understand that happens. The first thing he does is he slow.
Well, they used to be in a box. We got to say that they used to be in a box. They weren't always. Now when you go to the theater, they're usually in bags, which is probably done because of me. And now they're. But back in the day, they were in a cardboard box.
They were in this little box, and what would happen throughout the movie is, knowing or unknowing, you may not even know it. There's times I never even knew, but Tony would tear little pieces of the box up and throw them on your lap. So after a while, you had this giant mound of cardboard peanut box all over your pants, and that's how he rolled. Well, while he's doing that, we're watching Cliffhanger or the whatever, and then slowly, a Subway sandwich, a 6 foot, that's crazy. A 6-inch Subway sandwich makes its way across, like they're being handed out, and one eventually lands with me, and it's a whole sandwich. Which, if you guys know, the big sandwich is a big part of our culture and our lives. It's a reference we've talked about on the show. Now we're watching a really great movie. I love the movie Cliffhanger, and we're watching Cliffhanger with a big sandwich. And it's just one of these things I'll never forget as long as I live, that we had the big sandwich watching Cliffhanger, and it was just a gold mine. Gold mine.
I mean, Cliffhanger for me, and I mean, I'm pretty biased, but it is a top 5, top 10 action film for me.
100%.
I know a lot of people might be like, well, it's not as good as certain Die Hard or some of these other movies, but for me, it was. I loved it. It had an amazing cast. I mean, Sylvester Stallone, Janine Turner, Michael Rooker. I mean, John Lithgow as the lead villain. Rex Linn as one of the villains. I loved the cast. I loved the setting in the snow. The director was Rennie Harlan, and he was super hot at the time, having come off of Die Hard 2, and of course he do The Long Kiss Goodnight, and I guess he had an affinity for snow because all three of those movies are in snow.
Of
But
course.
his movies are either in snow or water usually, but especially his early stuff in that decade. And this movie just had all the great action stuff in it. It has great one-liners, tremendous dialogue, great actors. The action's unbelievable. All the scenes are great. I mean, for me, it's everything. It has
Yeah,
one of
it's
my favorite action scenes.
oh yeah. I'll let you tee that one up. I gotta say, this is one of the movies that I saw twice in theaters.
Oh
I
yeah,
saw it with you, and then I went back
yeah.
with my mom and dad. The funny thing about that is my mom does not like tension at all. And the opening of Cliffhanger is hands down one of the most intense, nerve wracking moments in screen. And it's shot so perfect. It's so well made. If you've not seen this movie or you haven't seen it in a while, I implore you to go back and watch it. It is so good. But the way that they shot it, the tension is so great. And I remember my mom reached over and grabbed my hand, and her hands were like, it's like she had a sponge in her hands. They were so sweaty. She was just so, it was so intense. Fantastic movie.
They
There
spoofed
is there.
they spoofed that opening in Ace Ventura when Nature Calls. Remember that?
They sure did. They sure did. Yeah, they sure did. It's that powerful of a scene that you have to go back and spoof that gag. I mean, that's how solid it was.
Yeah.
And Tony's line. There's a line from this, and he can tee it up. But forever, he has said this line to me, and every once in a while when we get together, it still comes out. The whole thing happens,
So I
and
love.
if
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. I was gonna say, and it involves Michael Rooker, and it's got to be. I assume it's that one. It's no wait. Is yeah. He says season's over, right? Yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. I don't want to spoil it.
That scene to me is the best scene in the whole movie, and they're about to kill. I mean, it's obviously not really a spoiler if it's been out for over 30 years now, but they're about to kill Michael Rooker because they don't need him anymore. They've needed him to try to get to this briefcase this whole time, and now he's locked in on his coordinates. They don't need him anymore as a guide, and so he tells him he tells the other villain he's with, that he can kill him. And so this guy is a big soccer fan, and it's the character Delmar, and he's a huge soccer fan. And all of a sudden, Rooker thinks he's going to shoot him, and he says, why do you think I'm going to shoot you?" And then he starts beating him up and using him as a soccer ball. And the whole time he's using him as a soccer ball, he's doing soccer commentary about all these strikes that he's committing on his body. And at some point, he kicks him over the cliff, and Rooker's hanging on. It's that great, that great moment where the guy's hanging on with one hand, and Dylan puts his foot on his hand, and Rooker happens to have a knife in his pocket, able to grab it, stick it in the villain's leg. Villain bends down, rifle comes over his head. Rooker grabs it, cocks it, screams "Seasons over, asshole," and blows him away. It's the best, and that line for me is the greatest in any action movie of all time, and so much so that I had to get something signed by him.
Oh,
So
for sure.
yeah, right. So what happened was, years later, quite a few years later, I was dating this girl, and I had never worked with Michael Rooker, and I still haven't, unfortunately. But I did date a girl who did work with Michael Rooker, and I found out he was on this show, and I was like, oh, I got to get down there and visit her on this set because I have to meet Michael Rooker. And so I did, and I got to meet him, but I didn't have anything with me at the time to get signed or anything like that. And so she was kind of prodding me about what I wanted for Christmas that year. And I don't know. I was like, but you know what would be cool? I wouldn't hate it is if I ever got a poster from Cliffhanger signed by Michael Rooker with the inscription, "To Tony, season's over, asshole. Michael Rooker." And I got that poster for Christmas, and it still hangs in my place today, and I love it.
It is for to add a little more context, that's the line that he's probably said to me 1,000 times when we lived together playing college football, playing watching wrestling, whatever we were doing as young men. That guy would turn to me and he was about to beat me. He'd be like, "Season's over, asshole," and he would just every single time like clockwork. And it became like a rallying call for years for us. So I think it's only fitting that you have a poster signed to you by Michael Rooker with that explanation. One note I wanted to throw about Uncle Skip is that the one thing I always appreciate about Uncle Skip is I grew up. I have an uncle, but he wasn't around very much, and so whenever Uncle Skip came into town, he was, because we were so close, he was kind of like a surrogate uncle for me. So I've always appreciated Skip. He always treated me like a nephew. He always he would joke with me and act like Uncle Skip. And so to me, I didn't know him any other way. I just knew him as Uncle Skip. I don't even know if Skip's his real name, if that's a nickname. I just know that he's Uncle Skip.
It's funny, man. His real name's Robin, and his dad was Skip, and so he would tell people you could call him Skip. I don't even call him Skip. I call him Teddy. So he's Uncle Teddy to me.
See?
His real name's Robin. He tells everyone to call him Skip. So it's very confusing. But that's the way it goes. And I don't get to go to as many movies with him as I used to. I mean, I used to go with him quite a bit. We did just recently see Furiosa together, though.
Oh,
So
fun.
that was fun. He did go to that one with us. But other than
Yeah.
that, not too many movies anymore with him as much. But I do see him quite a bit.
Yeah. He's a great guy. He was
Great guy.
funny as hell. Just gregarious fellow, super fun to be around and a real treat at the end of the day. So this is in May, by the way, just to tee it up. And I guess these released on the same day. So you have Cliffhanger that comes out, but then you also have a mildly controversial movie, not at the time, but in the lexicon of, or the lore of filmmaking, becomes controversial only in the sense of like, this is one of the first video game movies to really roll out, and it's Super Mario Brothers. What do you remember about that one?
I mean, this was a big week because it was Cliffhanger and it was Super Mario Brothers and Made in America with Whoopi Goldberg and Ted Danson. They all came out together. And Super Mario Brothers, I mean, I really enjoyed it. I had seen it at Carmike and really enjoyed the film as a live action Super Mario Brothers. I mean, a lot of people didn't like it. I understand. But it was a great cast with Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo, and I love Dennis Hopper, as we've talked about in this show before. But Samantha Mathis, it was a really good cast, especially at the time. Didn't do well at the box office at all. I mean, it was a $48 million movie or so, and did like 20. So secondary markets was where it had to make some money. But and over the years, it's become kind of a cult classic. But this was a movie that didn't do nearly as well. I did have a poster for it though, in my place at the time. I enjoyed it. It was campy in a lot of spots, and I know the cartoons recently come out, the animated ones come out recently, and a lot of people love that. So, but I thought this was a good movie.
Look, it didn't bother me. I remember seeing it. It is an interesting thing of later on in life, you learn about the whole how angry people would get when it doesn't exactly match the source material as an interpret. And we're going to have another source material coming up here shortly in a couple movies, where adaptation that is. But like the source material of Mario Brothers is a 8-bit video game where a guy goes through pipes and smashes turtles. I don't really, I don't really think the live action movie was that bad. You're right. It did what it did. Later on, Tony and I would work on a project where the production designer of that movie, a guy named David L. Snyder, David was the production designer on that. He also did Demolition Man, which is a whole separate story.
Oh yeah.
But talking to him about Mario Brothers is like, he got to come up with that wacky world. And if you go back and look at it, that is a very, very odd like production design. Like that is a weird looking movie in the sense of like, it's just got a different feel to it. I think that's what didn't work. I would almost say it was maybe a little ahead of its time in terms of the way it looked. It was a little too like dystopian, and it had like a weird, in a great way. So for me, Super Mario Bros. Wasn't a video game movie. It was a science fiction movie because that's what it felt like, which makes sense because come to find out, David is the guy that was the art director for Blade Runner. So you have like one of the most iconic science fiction films of all time. He helped make it look the way it does into a Mario Brothers movie. Hence, you have the science fiction element. I enjoy the movie. I think it's fun and campy in the right way. I love the new one, but I love the new one mostly because my kids love to sing Peaches over and over again. Thank God they've stopped, but for a while it was pretty bad.
I mean, look, the bottom line on this film also is, you've got this great cast, but it kind of got lost in the shuffle that week as well because Cliffhanger has a huge cast. It's a big movie, and Sylvester Stallone, who was very hot at the time, and he has a huge year this year for not being a Rocky or a Rambo movie. He's going to have 1983 is a big year for Sylvester Stallone in his more non franchise roles. So I mean, but like Made in America did pretty well at the box office with Whoopi Goldberg and Ted Danson, and it was a hot movie at the time too. It also had Will Smith in it. But
I didn't realize that.
I think it got kind of lost in the shuffle a little bit, this movie, and that's unfortunate. But that does happen to some good movies.
It definitely does, and I'd say it's worth looking at again, like we talked about for the production design element, because it feels really different than what you imagine. But Dennis Hopper's performance in it's very Blue Velvet. It's really like aggressive, and it's great, and it's fun, and he's creepy in it, and he's a great King Koopa. It's a very fascinating movie if you have a chance to go back and watch it again. Look, this whole list, this period of the 90s has so many great hidden gems. And so I'm excited to bring that one up. Now, this next movie is not a hidden gem because no one's ever heard of it except for Tony. And it comes out June 4th, and it's a movie called Guilty as Sin. And I don't even know this movie whatsoever.
Just because you don't know the movie doesn't mean it's not good. Doesn't mean other people haven't heard of it, pal.
Wait a second. If you've heard of this movie right now, post in the comments, somebody somewhere, if you've heard of this movie. Don't look it up. Just post in the comments. We'll see what happens.
A lot of talent on this film, though. I mean, you got Rebecca De Mornay, who's obviously was amazing, especially at the time. Don Johnson, Mr. Miami Vice, come on. And then it's directed by Sidney Lumet, who brought us movies like Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. So he's got a great, he was one of the best, and he's passed away, but was a wonderful director. And this is one of his like thriller films, which was a Hollywood Pictures release. And Don Johnson plays this potential wife killer, and Rebecca De Mornay has to defend him in court. And so there's like this relationship, this whole build up between their characters, and he may or may not be a wife killer, and she has to figure it out. And it's that kind of thriller. It's a nice movie. I mean, it's this kind of a psychological thriller.
The thing that's interesting is you said the Hollywood Pictures, and I as soon as you said it, I saw the logo, and like that's one thing that's missing, right? We don't have that as much nowadays. I mean, you do with A24 in the modern sense,
right?
But in this time period of filmmaking, you had, and obviously Harvey Weinstein's Garbage Water, but you had like Miramax would roll out some stuff. You had Hollywood that would roll out. Touchstone was big. Yep. And they all kind of had genres that they played in. They were cross, but I mean, a lot of them, you'd see a lot of horror movies with Touchstone in the front and things like that, right? There was a vibe to certain pieces. And as soon as you said Hollywood, it immediately put into picture of the kind of film. Hollywood always had these, I think eventually they were bought by Disney, if I'm not mistaken. But
they were.
They always had they were more adult-driven storylines and adult-driven films in the sense of like the content of them, not like pornography, but like adult movies. They were always more deep, is what I'm saying. They were more deep. I mean, we've already established that Tony has the intellect to handle these movies, unlike my 12-year-old self. I wasn't 12, but my brain was. I I kind of want to go see it because I did not realize that's who directed it. And obviously, when you start dropping those names, those movies are gold standard type films that he made. So
A really good supporting cast: Stephen Lang from obviously the Avatar movies, and Jack Warden from Used Cars, and I mean he's a classic actor. I mean, yeah, it's a good movie, and like I said, a good psychological thriller, which was kind of a popular genre, especially back in the '90s in this era. And we don't get as many of them as I would like in the modern era now, but especially in theaters. But back then, quite a few.
100%. Um, now, I, I guess the question you could ask when you think about that movie in reality is, Tony, what's love got to do with it?
Oh yes.
You see that segue? So this movie comes out, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is another film with a huge soundtrack, right? Doesn't it have a massive soundtrack for this?
Huge soundtrack, of course. It's Tina Turner. What's love got to do with it? Tina Turner, Ike Turner, and it goes about through their entire lives. And of course, Tina Turner is played by Angela Bassett, and Ike Turner is played by Lawrence Fishburne, and they have a really good chemistry on set in this movie as well. And I thought it was a wonderful film, and I followed Tina Turner's life pretty much my whole entire life because she's from she made her bones here in St. Louis, and so did Ike Turner. Ike Turner's from St. Louis, so St. Louis is a big part of the Tina and Ike story. And so I've been to some of the clubs that they've played back in the day, and yeah, this was a really wonderful film. And of course, Bassett goes up for an Oscar for this one.
That's what I thought.
But
I was going to ask you about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Tina Turner. She was great as Tina Turner. And I just recently saw the stage play for about Tina Turner back in November, which was amazing as well. But this is a really, really wonderful movie. If you're into these kind of biopic films about people in our pop culture, I would highly recommend this movie. Wonderful performances. Obviously, it's a great soundtrack. You get all the Tina Turner classics, Tina and the Tina and Ike classics, and that is what movies are all about.
For sure. I wonder where this is, and obviously this is not something I expect either one of us to know the answer. If you look now, like in the past 5 years, we've had a lot of music biopics come out, and they've all done well. And this is one of those films this is an earlier version of those where you're telling a story, that's obviously it's got a lot of drama behind it. There's obviously a big musical element. She was a huge star, and so was he. But it's very fascinating because this movie comes out and it's one of those times where it seems like one of the most timeless stories you could tell are these music biopics. And it's weird to me that we don't have more of them. It seems like they're a kind of a lost genre. They come in waves, but this one was a standalone out there by itself. There's not that many that come out in that time frame as far as I know. And this may be one of the earlier films that's really done one of the earlier music biopics that really did so well. Like for her to get an Oscar nom is pretty amazing. Now, Angela Bassett's a beast. I mean, this lady can act. Lawrence Fishburne, obviously, we all know he can act. And so, and they're young. This is earlier in their careers, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure. And I worked with Lawrence Fishburne many years later on a movie called Five Fingers with him and Ryan Phillippe. And he's a wonderful guy. He really is a really nice guy. He signed a big Matrix poster for me.
Nice.
But he's a really, really sweet guy. Kind of a shy guy, but very nice gentleman.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's one of those things where like a lot of times when we are able to tell these stories about someone that we've worked with or met or had interactions with, it's just interesting to see like we're talking about them. Most of the time we didn't meet these individuals in the 90s. We're in the 2000 pluses. But it's interesting to see that these are the movies that we saw them in when they were young in their career, and we got to them in towards their middle, not towards the end, but always more towards the middle of it. And that's when, some people settle in, some people in terms of it. They might have forgotten where they came from, but it seems like a lot of these actors that we're lucky enough to have met have all had like this great story of just being good, just good people, very nice and friendly. I don't know for certain. I know that Angela Bassett has been always described to me on set as being very intense. So you just have to be, you have to be aware of her acting method. And that's the other thing I think a lot of people forget. They don't realize sometimes when an actor's on set, if they're a character actor, a lot of them, once they get in that role, you don't do things to take them out of it because their focus is so
Right.
strict on it. So it's kind of fun to hear that Lawrence is a fun guy.
Another little known fact about this movie that kind of ties into a big '90s phenomenon at MTV, of course, is Kurt Loder was one of the writers on this movie.
Was he really?
He really was. Yeah, he was one of the writers on this film. I don't know how much. I don't know how much of the script he was part of, but he was one of them. Yeah, for sure. Which is
Did
cool.
we have him? We had another movie that he wrote on. Was that a couple episodes ago? When did he do the one with Ed Lover? Was he on that as well?
He's in it.
Oh, he's in it. That's
Yeah.
what it was. Okay. Okay. All right. It's interesting to me. I would have never pegged Kurt Loder to be a writer on a Tina Turner biopic.
It makes
But I
sense
guess it makes
about
sense.
music.
Yeah.
You know,
Fair enough.
I mean, yeah, but I didn't. I don't think he had done anything at that point as far as writing, but pretty cool.
It is cool. I do have to ask you, what is your memory of seeing the Jurassic Park trailer, the trailer for the very first time?
Intense,
Yeah.
intense, right? I mean, it's they put all the classic scenes in the trailer, so there's a lot of some of the classic scenes are in there as far as the T Rex coming up behind the kids and that whole deal in the cup, in the water. And, I mean, that's a classic scene. That's an iconic film scene. I mean, that's in the trailer. When you
Yeah.
saw it, it slows everything in the trailer slows down, and you got this big moment. And I think pretty much everybody wanted to see the film after seeing that trailer.
Yeah, I'd love to know. I'm sure you have some info on this, but like, I'd love to know the some of the numbers because I think they'd actually be kind of interesting. Because in today's standards, I just remember seeing that trailer, and it might have been in front of Cliffhanger when I saw it with you and or my parents, but I just remember seeing that trailer and turning to my dad, and my dad said something to the effect of like, "Oh my God, that looks so real." Because to us, this level of CGI didn't exist. This level of detail didn't exist. And as we go through our careers, I don't know how many people maybe have said this to you, but for me, a lot of the VFX guys or other filmmakers I've met, they cite Jurassic Park as being the movie that made them want to become filmmakers. Whereas for me, a lot of it I can tie back to Star Wars and other stuff, but for them, it was 100% Jurassic Park because when you saw this movie, which was a pain in the ass to go see because there was everybody in the world was seeing it. It was just it's very rare. I maybe would say the last movie I know that did this was probably Avatar, the first one.
You're right.
It's really rare that you go to a movie and the experience of the film, watching the movie, not just the story, but watching it and being in a room with these people and seeing these things happen and seeing stuff you've never seen before that your eyes and brain just can't process. It is just something super special that only happens in the theater. And I think to that stupid commercial with what's her face, the Australian chick. I can't think of her name right now. It's that AMC spot where what is that lady's name? She's Australian. She was in the Others. I can't think of her name.
Oh, you're talking
Anyway,
about Kidman.
yeah, Kidman. Thank you. Big name. I don't know why I couldn't remember. You have Nicole Kidman walking through this theater, and she talks. All you got to do is just be like, "Hey, do you remember when you saw Jurassic Park?" And everybody's gonna be like, "Oh my God!" Right? It's that big of a movie. Do you happen to do you have any numbers on this film? Like, because it was insane.
You know what's crazy about it, right? So nowadays, this movie would be what 300 million to make, somewhere in
Right.
there. Just
Right.
production budget. I mean, they did it for 63 million
Unbelievable.
back in that era.
Unbelievable.
$63 million for Jurassic Park, and it made over 1.1 billion. So
Good
it was
grief.
huge. It was huge, and we're talking about the trailer, and we all saw the trailer. We all wanted to see the film based off the trailer. But I remember because I didn't go opening night to see this film. I waited a few days, and I what happened was I was watching CNN at the time, which was way more moderate at the time, and so
And around.
and around exactly. And Larry King Live was a show that I used to watch fairly regularly because I used to love his guests and all the great questions he would ask. That night that this film opened, Steven Spielberg was on the show.
Oh,
And so I remember just, having seen the episode, of course. And they were talking about these dinosaurs and how they brought them to life. And there were people calling in to the show and they were talking about having seen the film earlier in the day and how much they just love it and it was how amazing it was and they've never seen anything like it on the screen and I just that entrenched that it had to go to this movie the next day, in the next couple of days,
right.
because it's a phenomenal film and obviously it's a classic and it's spawned several other parts of the franchise now, but yeah, I mean, such a great movie. Um, it's an iconic film.
It really, when I think back to it, again, I have a very fond memory of seeing that film with my parents and my cousin Wade. And I remember it because we did see it, Carmike. Sure did. Yep.
Yeah,
And I just remember the excitement. Like, again, I've talked about this before. My dad gets excited about certain movies. He was so excited to see the movie. And I remember, if you think about it, if you haven't seen Jurassic Park in a while, they don't really show you anything. And later on, there would be a joke that would come out by Mystery Science Theater would later put out a joke about this where they talked about Steven Spielberg makes movies about people looking at things. And it's so true that now that you watch a Spielberg movie, you'll see it. It's always, he does these reaction shots because that's what we understand, is we understand the reaction shot. But if you go back to, it's Elsie and Dr. Grant and they're in the Jeep, that very first time, dude, it gets me emotional thinking about it. That very first time that he stands up and he pulls his glasses down and he turns her head. I know I don't have the world's best memory, but there's certain pieces. The first time we saw the Brontosaurus or whatever it was, Tracheus, whatever, some kind of big dinosaur, we saw that on the screen and we're sitting there. I remember a gasp. There was a full blown, there was people literally gasping because you're seeing this dinosaur for the very first time. And for our eyes, we take CG for granted these days, but for our eyes, that dinosaur was real. It was on screen and somehow they had made dinosaurs come back to life. Right.
yeah.
And it's unbelievable. And in that movie, I saw it twice in the theaters. But I remember I had to do a summer reading later on, and my summer reading was Jurassic Park. It wasn't this summer. It might have been the next summer. I can't remember for sure, but I had to read the book. And I remember reading the book, and my favorite character in Jurassic Park was easily Malcolm. I mean, 100%, because it was Jeff Goldblum, and
Yeah.
he gives us the greatest meme in history of him propped up with his arm behind his head. It's like the greatest meme in history. And I remember reading it, and there's a huge difference. No one complained about the source material here, folks. Malcolm dies in the book. He dies, and the hunter lives. I forget what that guy's name was, but total different scenario. Totally different in the book. But it didn't matter because the movie was so well made, and it was so strong and so mind-blowing seeing it visually that it's just an incredible, incredible piece. Do you remember the vibe in the theater when you saw this? Do you remember what the energy was like?
Yeah, I mean, people were doing the same type of thing. It was that, oh my God, we're watching this movie and we've never seen anything like it. Which was
Yeah.
funny because just a few years earlier, Terminator 2 would come out, and I got the same vibe when I was in the theater watching that movie and then
Oh
watching
yeah.
the same thing. People were shocked by what they were seeing on screen. Those two movies, were very, very much transcended the art form. and changed how we make movies, which is funny because they both come out around the same in the same era.
Well, I mean, certainly now, like you think about it, to your point, which is extremely relevant. Now we almost every movie we see is chocked full of VFX.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
it's very rare, and in fact, so much so a lot of times people don't even know what the VFX are. It could be a sign painted out in the background or a sky replacement. It could be a drama that has no major dinosaurs or monsters or aliens or superheroes, but it could just be little things in the VFX side of stuff. That all comes from the idea of these films being able to use computer integration to tie this stuff together, and it's groundbreaking. But the thing that makes Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 significant to me is that not only did they use CGI to help them accomplish it, they did a brilliant job of also using practical effects.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you think about that Velociraptor's, that little claw bit, and it puts its toe down and it taps, that's like a guy wearing boots or something. It's practical. So they integrated practical effects with the CG, which helps you believe it. It helps you suspend your disbelief even further, so you're leaning in on it. And I mean, to say that Jurassic Park is a groundbreaking movie, like we were saying, is kind of even an understatement, because it's like Terminator 2, to your point again, it changed the entire industry for the better. I mean, sometimes I feel like it'd be nice if we had a little mix of practical and CGI. I wish we went back to some old filmmaking standards. I feel like it makes for a better movie, but it is incredible to consider that. And those were all hand rotoscoped, hand animated. There's no cheating back then. I mean, it's just incredible to consider the idea of what they pulled off.
Yeah, definitely movies these days lean way too heavy on CG now, and
100%.
that's the downfall. I guess you could, in theory, if you wanted to be the person who wanted to blame these films for it, that's fine. But they're absolutely amazing. And I worked with the kid who played, Tim. I worked with Joe Mazzello
Yeah.
just 3 years ago in a movie in Oklahoma City, and just a real the nicest guy. Signed a Jurassic Park poster for me and Bohemian Rhapsody, uh,
Oh, right.
Bohemian Rhapsody vinyl for me as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a really, really, really easygoing, nice dude. And so we talked about this movie quite a bit, and he was just blown away by his time on it.
What an incredible experience. And again, another one of those movies that introduced me to a lot of actors I'd be big fans of. That's
Yeah,
one of my first memories of Samuel L. Jackson, right? We would know Wayne Knight as, was Seinfeld on? I guess Seinfeld was on during this time period,
it was
wasn't
on
it?
that for sure.
Yeah, so we would know Wayne Knight as Newman, but again, solidified in my mind. It's just a lot of I probably had never really paid attention to. Oh gosh, who played Dr. Grant? Who played
Oh, Sam Neill.
Sam Neill? I didn't pay a lot, and he would later scare the crap out of me in Event Horizon. Good lord, and like across the board, just introduced a whole lot of stuff. So again, we've hammered on it, but it is just that magical. And it's one of those movies that I love rewatching with my kids because they love to rewatch it. It's one of the films that to me, will probably stand the test of time. Yeah, there's some dated elements because phones and stuff, but it still just keeps working. It's one of those films that's so classic, it just keeps working for a long time. And definitely the opposite of a bomb. Definitely opposite. Maybe one of the biggest films, $1 billion. Unlike the next movie, The Last Action Hero, which you know, I don't know what to say about this movie other than I remember seeing it with my dad and Wade, my cousin.
Did
And
you go to
and
Carmike 10?
that was 100% another Carmike movie. Oh, Carmike's very important, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But I remember seeing this with them, and my dad coming out of the theater, and he just would constantly say stuff like, "Are you Jack Slater or are you?" And I can't remember the rest of the line, but he would say it forever. He would constantly say it, and I think this is a weird marketing fail. I think this movie might have been a marketing fail because it seemed like it was presented at this big action movie, and it's really this really sweet. I mean, it's got action for sure, but it's really a sweet kid movie, like coming of age movie. that is about the love of movies. I mean, it's I watched it maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I was like, man, I actually really like this movie. The parody of this movie is really funny. It just didn't see, if I'm not mistaken, sit well with 90s audiences at the time. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean it's even spent more money on this movie than they did on Jurassic Park.
Mind blowing.
$85
Holy
billion
shit.
dollars to make this film.
Oh my
And,
God. My
and
brain just blew
yeah,
up.
made like 138, which isn't, which is obviously more than its production budget, not more than what it kind of needed to break even, but it was secondary markets and stuff. It more than made its money back in the long run. But point being, I don't know if you remember how this movie got marketed, which I think is kind of important. So
Go ahead.
Jurassic Park, we had that great trailer with all these iconic scenes. And when Last Action Hero first got marketed, it was marketed as a teaser.
Mm.
And Arnold Schwarzenegger would get out of this truck, and then he talked to the audience and says, "We're not ready to show it to you yet. You'll have to wait." That kind of thing. And
Yeah.
that was kind of the teaser for this big action movie that's getting ready to come out this summer. And that was like a year before. So it really had this huge marketing concept behind it to be this big summer blockbuster. And I do remember seeing this movie as a midnight showing opening night, and I was there right away. I love Schwarzenegger, and I loved this whole cast. I thought the cast was really just wonderful. And Charles Dance is in
Yeah.
this. He plays the villain. He's wonderful in this movie. He's really good, and it's got all these great guys like Art Carney and F. Murray Abram, and just Tom Noonan, Frank McRae, Robert Prosky, Anthony Quinn, like all these guys, right? I mean, so it's kind of an iconic cast, and then you got all these great cameos that pop up in the film as well, and it builds this whole world, this whole fantasy world, which I like the concept. I remember sitting there in Carmike at midnight, halfway through the movie, going, "This is not what I thought this was going to be."
Yep.
And
Yep.
and from that day forth, I kind of have always done a better job of making sure that I didn't go into any expectations, because at this point I'm 16 years old, and I've done a much better job of never going in with expectations, because I've learned the difference between what a filmmaker does with a trailer and what a filmmaker does with the actual product, and they don't always mesh. They're not always the same thing, and so you got to kind of allow the movie to be different than what you've seen and what your expectations are. If that makes any sense.
Oh, 100%. And it's interesting that you say that, because I think the number one struggle for a lot of films, when people start complaining about them, is the fact of poor marketing. Like, if they've done a gimmick like that, where they did this huge gimmick, they tried this, and look, I work in advertising, so I understand it, but they took a big risk. It didn't work. And it didn't work so much so that, like, the word of mouth went in reverse. So instead of it being like something like a phenomenon like The Quiet Place, and when that movie first came out, nobody really knew about it. I didn't have a lot of people talking about it. But what I started getting told was, oh, you have to see it in theaters, because the experience of seeing it in theaters, where if someone coughs, everybody jumps. And that was the experience. It was word of mouth on that side of things that just drove it forward and forward. Last Action Hero, unfortunately, went the opposite direction. And at the end of the day, if you would have not known what kind of movie it was, if you didn't think this was a high budget action movie that's going to have, like, yes, we're back to good old fashioned Schwarzenegger early 90s action, no, you're not going to get that. But now if you watch it, it's hilarious, because it's such a great satire and commentary on modern action movies. It's a parody, and it's brilliant at it. It's brilliant. And it's not a parody like a Zucker Brothers movie. It's not a parody like a Lampoon. It's a parody in this fantasy world. It's almost like Super Mario Brothers in the same way. It's just got this almost like it's an interesting film. And then when they go into the real world, that there's actual consequences, and the bad guy is like, oh my God, people actually die here. This is great. Like, he's so good in this
Oh yeah.
movie. It's so good. So good.
And I want to make a few more points about this movie too, because I thought the marketing was very similar to another film that was supposed to be a big summer movie that came out 2 years before it, Hudson Hawk.
Oh, right.
Hudson Hawk had the same kind of marketing behind it. It was supposed to be this big Bruce Willis action movie that comes out in the summer. The guy's just come off of two Die Hard films.
Yep.
You know, so I mean, he's the iconic action star at this point. And Hudson Hawk comes out and he's like on this rope flying through the air and stuff like that, and this is what they're marketing. And when it comes out, it's this weird comedy crime caper. It's bizarre, and it's not. And a lot of the elements I like. You know, I love Danny Aiello, who's with him in the movie too. But it's just different. And at the time, you know, I'm 15 years old or whatever. 14 years old when I was watching Hudson Hawk, and I thinking I'm supposed to be seeing what I'm seeing in these trailers,
Yep.
and I'm not for these couple of films. And I've learned not to do that again. But like I said, Hudson Hawk was another one that did the exact same type of marketing. Huge movie, didn't do that well because of it. You know, because it's hard to get word of mouth when you're so different than your marketing.
Yep.
Because people will just walk away from it going, "It's not what I thought it was." And even if they liked the movie, the first thing out of their mouth is, "It's not what I thought it was," and that makes people think it's bad, and they don't want to see it. That's what I've always kind of thought about with that kind of concept. And you know, Hudson Hawk wasn't my favorite Bruce Willis movie by any means. It's not, you know, but at the time I thought the same thing. I go, well, this is a really weird movie. I do like it. It's not my favorite Bruce Willis film.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a negative connotation, unfortunately. But
Yeah, no,
yeah,
it's an interesting point, because it goes back to something we've talked about a little bit in film history side of things, of the old Carloco and some of those other film companies, where they would make these movies based on the trailer, and the trailer is what they would shop this trailer around to find somebody to give them money or additional money or whatever. And then they would take that trailer and they would drop it in the public, and you'd watch it. And all the action scenes are literally in the trailer, and there is no other action. And you're like, well, this movie's 90 minutes long, and there's 4 action scenes, and I've seen them all. So there's no surprise. They didn't care. It was a money move. And so sometimes it's just like you said, it's just bad marketing on that side of it. I actually, maybe a week ago, somehow in my YouTube algorithm, probably because of this show, I ended up someone found old movie pitches. So these are the pitches that were done by, it might've been Golden Globus, and they were pitches. So they didn't have actors. Dude, it was just still images with music and the classic, I forget his name, but the voiceover guy. And it would be like, literally one of them was, it went like this: "He's no man." And then you saw some letters starting to form, and you're like, oh, what is it? "He's a Spider-Man." And it was Spider-Man.
Yep.
It's like Golden Globus was going to make a Spider-Man movie. What is happening? And it was literally, I'll see if I can find it. You might enjoy watching it, because you and I love this kind of stuff. It was like 20 minutes of these movies that were pitched, that some were made and you'd recognize them, and they would even have actors' names in them. And you'd be like, this guy never made that movie. He never made, but it goes back to the marketing thing, is my point. Is a lot of times
forever. Spider-Man was pitched forever before it finally became a Sam Raimi movie. You know, it was.
That's right.
That was around for a long time. I don't think people realize it.
Right.
I mean, Spider-Man the comic obviously has been around for ages. So I mean, you know, that movie was around for a while and it just never came to fruition. But one of the other things about Last Action Hero too. I mean, because we talk about these thumping soundtracks. This was a great soundtrack. Do you remember who was on this? I mean, this was
not totally,
because he's in the video for Big Gun with AC/DC.
That's right.
And that's a huge song, and it does really well. But I mean, this has got, couple Alice in Chains songs. It's got Megadeth, and it had Def Leppard, and it had Aerosmith released Dream On version for this movie as well, and Queensryche and Fishbone put Swim on it, and
Oh, Swim's a great song.
Cock the Hammer by Cypress Hills on this, was
Yep.
great. And I mean, it's a really Poison My Eyes, which is actually one of my favorite Anthrax songs. Is on this soundtrack. I love the soundtrack. It's amazing.
It's funny too because it's the beginning of it's kind of the it's where hair metal starts phasing away as grunge and alternative start merging in. So you have the soundtrack that has a mix of like hair metal and metal bands, classic metal bands, and then grunge and new alternative bands as they start to make their way. Because pretty soon you're going to get to a point where the soundtracks are just alternative.
Right.
And like that hair metal sort of vibe starts to fade away altogether. And whatever was popular at the time is no longer. It's just, that's a good point. I'm going to have to go pull that up again because I want to listen to it again. I remember now Aerosmith. I remember that very clearly.
Yeah, the soundtrack is amazing. I mean, it's a really mix. It's a really good mix, which I guess kind of, personifies the film because the movie's kind of all mixed up too a little bit. But I love the soundtrack and I like the movie. You're sitting in the theater and you're thinking to yourself, this is not what I thought this was going to be. That's
Right.
all. I mean, it's not. And over the course of time, you need to learn that that's not always an indictment that the film is bad. It could just be that it's not what you thought it was going to be in your mind.
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes down to, it's the same way of like if you order grilled chicken and they brought you grilled fish,
Right.
you're like, I mean, technically I'm getting the protein I need. It's just not exactly what I was. So I'm with you though. I'm totally with you. And I try and do that now. If I'm going to watch something, I love being surprised. I love the idea of, I try not to watch trailers anymore. I love the art of a trailer.
Right.
But I try not to watch them anymore because I really want to go into as many movies as I can blind. I've learned, especially as a Star Wars fan with the amount of content they put out, I'd rather not know anything about anything they're doing and just go into it because there's so much opinion on stuff. It's hard to just go in clean. But if you go in clean or you find like that, those mystery movies you were seeing, that's a great example. Going in clean, you don't know a movie you're going to see. So it's fun to be able to step in there and be like, okay, well, you got my attention because I have no expectations. Let's just enjoy the movie. I think that makes for a much better process. But sometimes you just can't help it, especially when it's a trailer like Jurassic Park or even Last Action Hero, where they've done an interesting job marketing. They just failed or succeeded. Either way, however you want to put it.
It's
I was gonna go ahead.
I mean, one of the people that mastered those types of trailers, the anonymous trailer, is M. Night Shyamalan, who would release trailers that had nothing to do with anything that was getting ready to be in his movie. They were just basically teasers, and you had no idea what was going to happen in his films. He was a master of it, especially for his first like 5 or 6 films. And you'd go into those movies not even knowing what the plot would be. I had no idea, which I always thought was fun. So
yeah, it's amazing, and the phenomenon of his earlier work. My God, man, like and look, I like a lot of his later work. Not to tangent for a second, but we. Convergence played a festival and we closed. So The Visit played and then our movie played. And that was an interesting combo, but I got to sit and watch The Visit pretty early. Man, that movie is fantastic. Yeah. I really enjoyed it. Had no idea what I was getting into. Loved every second of it.
Yeah.
It was just clever, so to speak, just really clever. So you've asked this question, which I think is funny. You've asked this quite a few times throughout this podcast, and I've given you the same answer. So I'm going to ask you this question first. What is at this period, we're coming into the summer. We've been seeing, we're in a spot where we've started to show a pattern here, but what is your favorite theater at the time right now? Because it seems like we're getting into this positioning statement. So what is your favorite theater in Mobile right now?
It's really weird because they were all different. They all brought something different. They looked different. They weren't all cooking. Like nowadays, you'd be like, oh, all the theaters, AMC's kind of look similar. I mean, there may be some slight differences, but most of them are kind of bigger companies releasing a concept and that kind of stuff. And I felt like back in the day, we had all these different theaters, and they weren't all under one umbrella at the time. So you had different looks. Like the Bel Air 2 was cool. On across the street from it was Village 6. Then you had the quintessential, Springdale 6 in the mall, which was kind of cool. And then you had, Carmike was the first theater of its kind, which is more that like cookie cutter concept at the time, but I still loved it. And then like Movies 10 in the Hour Theater was different. Dolphin Street had a totally different concept. So I loved them all in a lot of different ways, and I loved them all for what they brought. But at the time, like I'm not attending Dolphin Street all that much anymore in 1993 because I just don't need to. I mean, it's
Yep.
between Carmike and the stuff that's in more midtown area, I'm able to cover all my bases. And if I miss a movie, I go to the Dollar Theater. So that was kind of the deal. So I mean, I at the time really loved the Dollar Theater, which I just thought was in such an iconic place. Of course, I'm going to school right across from it, so it's very convenient. And Farmore's right around the corner, and you got the pizza place right next to it. And everything about it was just amazing, and I loved the inside of it. Really dying to try to find some photos, a little bit more of that theater. And I'm never gonna get them, but um, that I wish I had the type of technology we have now because I would have taken tons of photos inside that place. But
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen some too, just for memory. Also, I really want to see that pizza again because the more we talk about it, the more my memory taste buds are like, wait a second, that was really good pizza. It was
it
thick, and I just remember it. So
was like a thicker, thin crust though, because
yeah,
it was cut in squares, just like Chicago style, but St. Louis style pizza. But it's not as thin as St. Louis style. It's more like the pub Chicago crust. And so I mean, it was called Chicago's best pizza. So it was, that's what it was. But yeah, it was quite amazing. It's probably the best pizza in Mobile, I thought at the time for sure.
probably
But
still is.
it might still be. Um, but yeah, I loved the Dollar Theater. But Carmike 10. What was great about that theater was they always had all the all the midnight movies.
Hmm.
So all my midnight memories come usually from Carmike, except for seeing Dick Tracy at Springdale.
Right.
And so that's why I love that theater because I that's a lot more. I see a lot more. Well, I see a lot of Dollar Theater movies with my mom and stuff too, but a lot more of my movie going was at Carmike, especially with you and my mom and stuff like that. So I do love that. I did love that Carmike 10 movie theater, but the Dollar Theater is pretty good. And but I love some of the architecture on like I love the way Village 6 looks.
I was just about to say, if you're going to ask me, I'm going to tell you, Carmike is my favorite theater because I have so many memories from that theater. It's very important. But my God, Village 6 nowadays, it would actually be more popular because it has that retro aesthetic. It'd be retro, but it had those arches. It had the drop down, like the round globe lighting. I mean, it was very. What I remember of it, and it had a dankness to it that was very unique. I mean, it was a very, very unique theater, and it
We
had its own character.
we do have some photos of that theater from the outside, so those I'll put up on our page.
Oh, perfect. That'd be incredible. Because it definitely had a unique architecture that, again, nowadays would go over like gangbusters. It had like a little bit of mid-century ish kind of vibe to it. It was incredible. Loved that theater. Loved the look of that theater.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I mean, even like the Bel Air 2 for me was just cool looking. I don't know what it is. I just like that theater and I just like that look and that design. And I don't know, man. They all brought something different. That's why we're doing this show essentially. Is because they were all so different. The theaters were so different. I've never. I mean, granted, I in even in St. Louis, um, Warenberg kind of had the same type of theater everywhere you went. So this was kind of when I moved to Mobile and saw all these theaters and they were all so different. I was like, man, this is a kind of a cool way to go see movies. So yeah, it was a good time.
It is, and it reminds me of the same thing I've talked about it before about my love of Alamo Drafthouse in the sense that
Oh yeah,
it's not the same, but it just feels different. It's a different vibe when you go to a theater there. It's a different feeling. It'll never be quite what we experienced because the risk on that doesn't make sense. The build out to do something like that, especially like the Bel Air 2. I saw Return of the Jedi there. I remember it. I remember everything about it. And it's because that movie meant so much to me as a kid. But I remember going in there and I remember there was just two lanes and it was literally you walked in and that kind of existence will never happen because the movie business doesn't allow theaters to exist that way anymore. They just can't, right? The industry doesn't allow it. So it is fun. That's part of this conversation is to say that like looking back on those is something fascinating. There's something beautiful about it. It's the only way we can really do it because we didn't think to take pictures of this stuff at the time. We didn't think that way. So all we have is our memories to help paint that picture. So essentially we're storytellers telling the stories of these. We're using movies as a framework. And so I think that's what, again, we talk about it a lot, but that's what I love about having these conversations is digging around and finding that stuff.
absolutely.
Did you have a pick for this week? Do you have any kind of Tony's pick for the week to throw in there?
Well, I'm gonna throw in Guilty as Sin.
Okay. I like it.
You know, I'm catching a lot of grief from you, and and I think people should go watch it.
I'm going to watch it.
If you're a fan of Sidney Lumet, you know, I mean, he made so many iconic movies. I mean, this is one of those that I wouldn't. It's not a Serpico, it's not Dog Day Afternoon. It may not even be Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, but it's really good. And I say watch it, give it a go.
I love it. I love it. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode. Again, we thank you for hanging out with us. As always, we said it earlier. You can leave comments. Just tell us what your thoughts are. You can follow us on all the social channels. We've talked about those. Links are there for you. And again, we're always asking for, you know, what was your favorite movie out of the list we gave? Did you like Jurassic Park more than Cliffhanger? Did you love Last Action Hero when you saw it in theaters? Just let us know in the comments, and we'd love to hear from you on that side of things. Anything else you want to say to wrap up, Tony, before I hit the old pause button?
No, that's it. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.
Cheers.